All right, guys, so let's keep going. So we got another high-level battle that we need to break down. We talked about Florida and Arizona, but I want to kind of dive into the second half of this Las Vegas Classic, and that was Villanova taking on number 8 BYU. BYU beat them 71 to 66, and we saw elite freshman impact, and we saw a sneaky national championship contender. I believe that BYU is one of those kind of sneaky teams that could potentially win the Big 12, and if they have a high enough seed, I do think that they have the team makeup plus the star power in order to make a late run in March. So let's start with Villanova. So we saw that this was a debut game for new coach Kevin Willard. We saw that he had success in Maryland, and it seemed like he, jumped ship after they lost in March Madness, and he went straight to Villanova. Now, I think that him jumping ship from Maryland to Villanova, it was kind of a signal of the NIL transfer portal with players bouncing and coaches bouncing. And I think he's kind of the face of that if you look at all of the reports from this offseason. Buzz Williams goes to Maryland. We'll talk about them later. But I think Kevin Willard, he was kind of dealt a bad hand because when he got there, I think he recruited a decent roster, but it was met with a lot of injuries. And so that they were battered and bruised leading up to this opening game. The Wildcats had a rash of injuries leading up to the opener, so the depth was already questioned. And I think in the midst of all of that, Bryce Lindsey stepped up with 22 points, 7 for 14 from the floor, and he really is the one that kept Villanova in this game. But we saw from the opening tip that I think BYU had the momentum and they had all of the answers. And so we know that a lot of the answers were found in AJ Dybantsa. He is the consensus number one pick. And I think that for every true college basketball fan, we knew him coming out of high school. And I believe all of the hype, he absolutely delivered. 21 points, 6 rebounds, 9 for 18 from the floor. And for me and from my vantage point, it wasn't just about the box score. I believe that it was all about his poise. I tweeted out, I said, if you want to know why AJ Dybantsa is the consensus number one pick for everybody, just look at the last 2 minutes of that game. I believe that AJ Dybantsa took over that game, that he controlled the tempo, he attacked off the bounce, and he filled gaps in transition. He did everything that was needed to do to win this game. We saw that it wasn't just AJ. He also got contribution from some of his teammates. We saw Richie Saunders. He did what veterans do. He had 15 points. He had 7 boards. But he also had all the hustle plays, all the things that were necessary in order to win in March. I saw our research that he extended his free throw streak to 29, and it was one of the longest in program history. And I think that's an amazing stat because what it shows me is that there's a level of consistency that will help AJ develop into the star that he is slated to be. We also saw Robert Wright III. He finished with 14 points, but it was an easy 14 points. He got all the shots that he wanted by getting to the spots that he was comfortable in and knocking them down. I think those 3 players are really the core of BYU's offense. I think that if Richie and if Robert can do what they need to do in order to score and take some of the pressure off of AJ, when it's time to go win the game, I think AJ has that killer mentality. He's not forced to score, 40 points every night. That he can be in a kind of KD role where he can rely on the young talent, he can rely on the other guys in order to keep them in games, and he can be the one to handle the rock in the last 2 to 3 minutes of a half and go put the team on his back. I believe that BYU won this on the margins. They turned Villanova over 11 times and turned those into 17 points. And I think that's so necessary because what it shows me is that the team cares on the defensive end, that it wasn't just about scoring points, but this was playing collectively on a string on the defensive end in order to turn your defense into offense. The transition game was huge. They had 9 fast break points to Nova's 3. And the Cougars only coughed it up 4 times all night. So for a game with freshman guards and a lot of hype and high intensity, I believe that this ball security showed that there was a lot of poise, there was a lot of leadership, and there was a lot of togetherness and the value of possessions. And I think that is going to be the thing that is necessary if they can keep it up to go far in March. I believe that, for both teams, there was a struggle to score early on. I think some of that came with newness and nervousness. And we saw that the Cougars shot just 36% and Nova shot 26%. But when BYU went on that 23 to 13 run, I believe that lead late at the half, it really set the tone defensively. I believe it showed that BYU can win in a number of different ways. They don't have to come out and, be hot from the floor. That they can use their defensive prowess in order to help make up for their offensive mistakes and their offensive misses. And so what it really showed me is that this is a scary team, because what happens when both sides are clicking? I think when both sides are clicking, we can see a national championship contender. I wasn't high on BYU coming into the season because I thought a lot of their preseason rankings was just because of AJ. But actually seeing them today, it actually showed me that the number 8 ranking is not totally far off. I think that BYU has all the ingredients in order to make a run in the Big 12. I think that their lack of veteran leadership is going to come to bite them for some of the other teams in the Big 12, namely Jaden Bradley in Arizona. I believe that, other teams in this league can, take them on, especially late. And if you're going to have to rely on AJ, we haven't seen a bad game from AJ yet. Now, I know this is the first game of the season, but I'm curious to know what it looks like when both sides aren't clicking. Can they find a way to get these ugly wins out? When you're facing a team like Houston that literally identity is on their defensive prowess, I think that if they struggle in Houston, can they squeak out that kind of win? Because not only will you see them in the Big 12, but you'll also see them in March. And so that's what it's going to take for them to, get over that hump, and for them to do, like AJ said, not just win the Big 12, but also win a national championship. So let's go back to Villanova. So we saw that some of the Villanova bigs try to keep it close. We saw Duke Brennan. He finished with 15 rebounds, and he was really on the glass all night. Matt Hodge, he worked for second chances. Christian Jeffrey, I think, gave them a spark with 11 points off the bench. But I think the problem was just the injuries, that they couldn't string together enough stops or hit shots in sequence. They couldn't develop a pattern of hitting shots. And so I think that's why they finished with such a cold percentage from the floor. But it just was a problem of a togetherness. And I think that'll come with, health, as they get more players back. They'll probably get some of that poise, that togetherness back. But I think that's what contributed to a lot of their turnovers late. And so I think that it's early. It's early for me to judge Villanova. I think, with a new coach comes a new system. And we saw that they had an undermanned roster. I think Bryce Lindsey is a real guard in the Big East. I'm excited to see what he does with Duke Brennan. And I'm curious to know what this team is going to be like, in February and March, right? This might be a last four in, or a first four out team. I don't know if they are definitively a tournament team, but I think for tonight, it was all about development. Can we establish Kevin Willard's system, and can we begin to build the pieces in order to make a run in March? If we get that chance. I think they're going to have a tough time in the Big East, but we'll see. But I think really tonight was all about BYU from start to finish. I think that this was a statement win. Like I said, it wasn't the prettiest, but they found a way to win. They controlled the tempo and the pace, and they imposed their own style and identity. I think that Dybantsa, it wasn't just all hype. And one of the things that I'm seeing in all these freshmen so far is that they're not, wetting the bed when it comes to the hype, that when the lights are brightest, they're coming to perform. We saw that just now with Cole Pete. Now we're seeing it with AJ Dybantsa. And so we'll be talking about Darren Peterson later, but I think those three, along with Cameron Boozer, they're lottery picks, and they're showing you why. And we're not having this conversation in December and January. We're having this conversation in the first game. And that's one of the things that you want to see in, stars. And I'm excited to see these two teams play against each other, Arizona and BYU. But I think, BYU has the depth in order to make the run. I think one of the things that's going to affect them the most is, can their youth continue to develop, right? Is it just the bright lights, or when the lights aren't on, when they're, playing on a random, Saturday morning, can they still keep that same defensive intensity? And I think that sometimes what happens is you run into a lot of big moment teams that only get up for the big moments, right? But it's like these games are a defining statement wins, but when you play other teams that probably don't have your same kind of talent, AJ, can you step up? Richie, can you step up? Robert Wright, can you step up? And it's really going to be a test, because if I think that they can stay consistent, they can definitely make a run. I think both teams need to use this game as a learning game. And I think that they'll both grow from this. I think Villanova needs to go find its go-to offense outside of the emergency options in Bryce. And I think BYU just needs to keep sharpening their ball movement. But I think for everybody that was a college basketball fan, tonight delivered. And we got stars delivering. We got even, coaches delivering. And I think that what we are expecting from this college basketball season, if this is the floor, I'm excited to see what else we have in store for leading up tomorrow.